Hello everybody, Tom from IGN here, and earlier this week I got to play a whopping 16 hours of Cyberpunk 2077. I put out a full preview of that, you can go check that out, but I also wanted to see what your guys' burning questions were that I didn't necessarily answer in that preview. So we put out a call on Twitter and on YouTube, and we took your questions, the most popular ones, the most frequently asked ones, and I'm going to try to answer what I can. Kicking things right off, probably the most popular question we got was, what is driving like in the game? That's not really something I talked about during the preview itself, but it's a totally fair question because you are going to spend a lot of time driving around Night City, and it just didn't sort of strike me as very notable, I guess, is my impressions of it. It wasn't bad. It wasn't like, Gran Turismo. You're not gonna, it doesn't feel like a crazy driving game or anything like that, but it felt smooth enough. I enjoyed just kind of seeing the sights. The interiors of cars and the looks of cars are really immaculately detailed. Notably, I spent most of my time driving cars in third person and then motorcycles in first person, and that's mostly a personal preference. Like, I don't really like driving in most games in first person, but motorcycles, I felt like I actually really loved driving motorcycles even more than cars in this game because they were so agile, right? Like, you could get through little spots, you could go through twists and turns, you could weave in and out of people, and because Night City is a very dense city full of lots of roads, you're gonna be taking a lot of turns. Bilal DevTech on Twitter specifically asked if the driving felt slow, because it apparently looked slow in some of the gameplay previews. Some of the earlier worse cars you drive are definitely slower, but at one point I stole a really high-end sports car, and that was going much faster in a much more noticeable way. So it's going to vary throughout the game. Another common question we got on YouTube was that from some of the gameplay videos out there, the world looked very empty, that there weren't many people in it, there wasn't much stuff around. And that's something I think I probably only comes across in like the gameplay trailer. When I was playing the game, it felt like there were a lot of people, especially when you're walking around busy sort of market areas. It really feels like a populated world. That wasn't really a concern of mine. When you're moving faster, and especially in certain areas like the outskirt areas, when you're kind of getting out of Night City proper, those areas definitely are less populated, but that's also the flip side where you're going to see, a lot more nature, a lot more cactuses and plants and that sort of thing. It's pretty cool how much the neighborhoods like that can feel diverse from each other. I liked that part. And so no, I wouldn't say that the world felt empty in my experience, especially in some of the shopping kind of market areas. There's a lot of stalls. I will say I was surprised at how few of those stalls, like food stalls and that sort of thing, were actually interactable. There's only some very specific ones that are actual shops, and then there's a lot that are just there to kind of be set dressing. That was a little bit disappointing. It made the world feel a little bit less interactive, but I wouldn't describe it as empty by any means. A very popular question from our YouTube was from Daniel Harrison, who asked, how dense would you say the verticality is to this game, i.e. how many of those skyscrapers are explorable? And that was similar to another question from Adam Garcia, who also asked how many interiors are accessible, buildings, rooms, not necessarily separate cells. And this is maybe going to sound like a disappointing answer, but I don't think it's as disappointing in practice as it will, which is not many of them, right? I think there's this perception that maybe this is one of those games that it's not a huge open world. It's big, but it's not like as massive as some other RPGs, but there's all these buildings, there's all these places you can go. Most of the buildings, like in many city games, are not actually enterable at any time. And similarly, when you get in an elevator to go up to a certain floor on a skyscraper, like your home, for example, in the skyscraper where your apartment is, you usually only have like one or two button options in terms of floors you can actually go to at a given time, right? This is not going to be a game where you can go into absolutely every building, see absolutely every floor. But the reason that's not much of I don't really see that as a terrible thing is because A, what would you be doing in all those buildings with no reason to go in them anyway, I guess? And B, I did find a lot of locked doors that were probably going to be used for certain other quests. So the advantage of the verticality and kind of the scope of Night City is not just, oh, you can go into every building, but, oh, a quest can send you into any building, right? That's a very important distinction, is that you could get a quest that sends you into a building you've never been in that was 2 blocks down from where you started the game, and suddenly it's a completely fresh area and familiar territory. Another common question we got was about Melee, which I didn't talk about much in my preview. L-Game on YouTube asked, how is the Melee? Do you think it's possible to do a full Melee playthrough? And Blake James also asked, how is Melee combat, katanas, etc.? Melee is okay, right? It's not, I said this in my preview, combat wasn't exactly the thing that blew me away anyway, and I think Melee kind of just like folds into that. It was really fun. I did find a katana at one point, and it was extremely fun to put some points into perks that were higher melee damage, get some cyber augments that gave me more armor, you know, that sort of thing, and just run into the fray and start cutting people up. That was really, really fun. The melee system itself is actually fairly sort of simple, right? It's got a light attack, a heavy attack to break guards, and then you can guard yourself and also press guard right when you get hit, right before you get hit, to do a kind of counter punch. So there's that sort of the building blocks of that there. And there are these bare knuckle boxing sort of side quest fights you can do to play with that stuff. I think the tools are definitely there to make Melee a playstyle if you want to lean into that, right? They have a lot of options, just like they do with a lot of things in this game, to support different playstyles. It's not deep enough in what I played in the first 16 hours to make me want to only go Melee, but that might differ for you. Another common question we got was about life paths. Specifically, Jack Jones asked, how significant is your life path choice? And Sloan asked, how often do you wonder how different the story would be if you had chosen a different path? I think this is a great question. You get to choose one of 3 life paths at the beginning of the game. It's a big decision right away, but I wouldn't overly stress too much about it. The life path determines the very, very, very beginning of the game. You kind of get a very customized intro. And then the feeling I got from after that, and obviously I haven't played through the whole game, so I don't know the major impacts if it comes into play later, if other stuff differs later. But basically what it was is that I then got different unique dialogue choices for that life path. So I went with the Corpo life path, and essentially what that did is anytime I was talking to suits, right, talking to like higher up corporation people, it made those conversations extremely easy for me. And not in like a bad way. It was like, oh, I knew exactly, my character was from this world, and I knew exactly what to say in that situation to kind of smooth the wheels a little bit, grease the wheels, and that was really cool to see that in action. I really do wonder, and to answer Sloane's question, yeah, like, if I wasn't the Corpo life path, some of those conversations would have gone really, really differently for me. If I had chosen the Street Kid life path, though, like, maybe I would have, you know, had those types of moments, but for other parts of the game. So I think there is a lot of flexibility there, but also I don't think that it's the type of thing where, like, it's gonna be 3 different games depending on what life path you choose. Balaji Asari on YouTube asked, how does character customization have an impact on the game/gameplay considering it's a first-person perspective game? This is a fun question because the answer is not a whole ton. This is specifically, at least with when it comes to cosmetic customization. I kind of jokingly said this to some people before earlier in the week, but essentially make sure you're happy with your fingernail choice. There are a lot of fingernail options, and that's what you're gonna probably be seeing most in terms of your character customization, because there are no, you know, cutscenes where you're seeing your character in third person or things like that. I did see my character every time I open the menu when you're equipping things, right? And you do see your character if you're driving in third person. So there's plenty of opportunities. Occasionally you look in mirrors, things like that. But by and large, you shouldn't also sweat the character look customization a whole ton, because they give you a lot of choice. It's really cool. It's a very cool character customizer, but yeah, you're not going to be seeing much more than your hands most of the time. Jessica Starr on Twitter says, I'd like to ask about the class system. How much can you multi-class? Did you see respec options or perks, skills that feel game-changing versus just percentage increases? Yeah, these are all really, really important things that I didn't have a ton of time to touch on, and also I didn't get a ton of time to dig too deeply into in my 16 hours, because this is a deep game. To be clear, there's not really a class system, right? You don't pick, warrior or hacker or whatever. You just sort of pick the attributes that you want, and then you focus on upgrading perks in that way. The thing I really liked about this system is that it was extraordinarily flexible. Like, even if I put all my attributes into physical body, right, the stat called body, then I realized that kind of halfway through the game, like, oh man, I'm really hacking a lot. I'm really enjoying that. Your perks for hacking get experience points for that just by doing that thing. So even if you're not speccing into that skill, or you hadn't previously been, you'll still be rewarded for using it in a way that then empowers those skills more, and then you can start putting more attributes points into it and unlock more skills and stuff. So it's very, very flexible in terms of, if you want to be a big burly dude who also hacks a lot, or a really stealthy person who uses melee weapons, like, there's a lot of opportunity to mix all those attributes and perks together. And also, yes, I did think that there were, it's a healthy mix of percentage increased perks and really cool new things. Like, the cool stat has a perk that you can unlock called Cold-Blooded that gives you a buff that every time you kill someone, it gets a buff, and then you can increase that perk to have more stacks of that buff as you chain kills together, and then you can also increase what that perk or that buff actually does. So maybe it'll increase damage or reload speed or things like that. And you can, so there's cooler choices where it's like, that's both statistic improvements, simple stuff, but also it's a pretty cool new thing that is tangibly different given to you if you decide to go into that tree. Alexander Almas on YouTube asked, you seem unimpressed with the gunplay. Can you speak on more why you felt that way besides bullet sponge? This is something I alluded to earlier. It's a little bit of a tricky thing to explain because it's a lot due to feel. Like, I felt like the weapons were just kind of fine early on, right? Like, they were pretty high recoil. It felt like enemies were pretty bullet spongy, could take a lot of hits, and there wasn't just a lot to wow me. What I will say is that and I do mention this in my preview, as I got deeper into that system, I started unlocking new abilities, new augments, new weapons that were kind of changing it up so that it was less just like a first-person shooter. I think when you're just comparing it to a first-person shooter, because that's what it looks like on the surface, it is an underwhelming sort of gunplay. It's fine. It's fun. It's just not like doing anything to blow you away. So yeah, it's all those little things of just sort of like how it felt, kind of how quickly I was taking damage. I had to retreat and heal. But then as you get more empowered, those things started to sort of go away. So this is one where I can't make a final determination on yet. You really got to play the whole game or more of the game to figure it out, I think. Michael on Twitter asked, what's the difficulty like? This is a really good question. There were 4 difficulty options that I saw, going from basically story mode, where it's just super, super easy. I played on normal, which is the second from the highest, basically hard above it. And it was challenging at times. It really was. You got to be smart about how you play. This being an RPG, you're going to be quick saving a lot. I was saving before absolutely every single fight. There's going to be some save scumming involved there for some people, for sure, because it's easy to get overwhelmed and it's easy to make a mistake, or just kind of get caught off guard and get killed, and you got to reload a checkpoint. That said, this also depends a lot on what sort of missions you're on, right? Because every mission has different levels, and so if you go into an area of Night City and start taking on gang members that are listed as a very high danger level on the map, you're probably gonna get your butt kicked. And there are these enemies that are marked literally with a skull that are just like, this is too high a level for you, don't go near them, and they'll whoop you, really. But if you're sticking to, more lower level guys, or you're focusing on things that are within your level, it can be a lot easier. There are a lot of little random fights just scattered all over Night City, and if you just sort of jump into a random little one here and there, those skirmishes can go by pretty quick and be pretty simple. How it gets, progresses as you level up and deeper into the game and that sort of thing, I can't say. I only got 16 hours in to what feels like a very, very large RPG, but at least early on, it feels like there's a good mix of some easier missions and some pretty challenging stuff that's going to have you, saving often and being smart about how you play. Shawshank Saxena on YouTube asked, you told us to temper expectations and that the game is a slow burn. How would you compare it to Red Dead Redemption 2? Now I'm going to say something controversial right away, which is I didn't really enjoy Red Dead Redemption 2 very much. I thought it was a beautiful game. I thought it was a technically impressive game. I thought it was way too slow and just kind of tedious in a lot of its activities. This does not feel like that to me. This feels slow like an RPG feels slow, right? Anybody who's played maybe, and this is going to be a weird comparison given Cyberpunk looks like a first-person shooter, but anybody who's played something like Divinity 1, right? You're stuck in that first town for something like 4 hours before you even leave it to fight your first zombie. That's a slow-paced RPG. And I'm not saying Cyberpunk is that slow, because I think even that was a little too slow, but it's a different thing than Red Dead Redemption 2's slowness, where it kind of made you just move very slow and the things you were doing were very deliberate. It's not that it feels like it has that sort of deliberate, this is the pace it wants you to go at. It's just that the focus isn't always on action, is what I meant by it being slow. The focus isn't always on get in gunfights, go crazy, shoot people, like you would think from a first-person shooter in this futuristic world full of crazy guns. It feels like an RPG, and it comes with the pace that you would expect from an RPG. And that's all I meant by tempering expectations in that regard. And finally, a quick one I wanted to hit was from House of Tides on YouTube, who asked, is there any indication that there's an endgame Skyrim-esque Radiant Quest content that repeats, continues, and is sort of infinitely replayable after the main story, that sort of thing? This is a great question. I just didn't want to leave it hanging, but I don't know. 16 hours in is hard to tell in what is probably going to be a very, very large RPG. I didn't see any immediate indication of that sort of thing, but obviously I was very, very early on, so, you know, we'll have to see when the final thing comes out. But I hope I hit your questions. Thank you very much to everyone who sent them in to us. This was a lot of fun. It's a different format. Let us know in the comments if you liked it, and be sure to check out our actual final preview if you want my in-depth, curated thoughts on what it was like to play 16 hours of Cyberpunk 2077. And for everything else gaming, keep it right here on IGN.